Welcome to your English 2 class. Today we will read a very famous and special prose named An Angel in Disguise, written by Timothy Slay Arthur. Popularly known as T.S. Arthur, was born on June 6, 1809 and earned credibility as a 19th century American author. In this story, An Angel in Disguise, T.S. Arthur describes the transformative and restorative power of selfless love. It relates the advent of Maggie, a frail young orphan, into the lives of Wheelwright Joe Thompson and his vinegar tempered wife Jane, and the miraculous effect that the child's presence has on the woman's character and the happiness that she brings to her adoptive family. So let us begin with the prose. Idleness, vice, and intemperance had done their miserable work. Idleness was laziness, right? Vice symbolizes something that is malicious. And intemperance means being alcoholic had done their miserable work. And the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wretched children. She had fallen upon the threshold of her own door in a drunken fit and died in the presence of her frightened little ones. So we are talking about the mother who was died and lying in amidst the three children of hers who were in wretched condition. Death touches the spring of our common humanity. This woman had been despised. This woman who the woman who has died was hated, right? Scoffed off means made fun of and angrily denounced by nearly every man, woman, and child in the village. But now, as the fact of her death was passed from lip to lip in subdued tones, okay, because the news of her death was passing from lip to lip in subdued tones, pity took the place of anger, the sorrow of denunciation. Now people started feeling very sorry as they denunciated her. Neighbors went hastily to the old tumble down hut, in which she had secured little more than a place of shelter from summer heats and winter cold. So, here this so here we are talking about So here we are talking about how the mother has, somehow managed decent, not a decent. We can't say it's a decent one. Rather, she had secured a little place for them, okay, to provide herself and her children shelter. Some with grave clothes for a decent interment of the body. Interment means what? Burial. And some with food for the half starving children. So the neighbors came to meet the dead body rather. Some came with food for the half starving children and some with clothes so that the process of this intermittent process can be taken place. Of this, John the oldest, a boy of 12, was a stout lad, able to earn his living with any farmer. Kate, between 10 and 11, was bright, active girl, out of whom spawned something clever might made, if in good hands. But poor little Maggie, the youngest, was hopelessly diseased. 2 years before, a fall from a window had injured her spine, and she had not been able to leave her bed since, except when lifted in the arms of her mother. So, 2 years back, she fell from the window pane and she broke her spine very badly. From that time onwards, she was unable to stand on her own. She can do so only when she was actually carried by her mother. What is to be done with the children? That was the chief question now. The dead mother would go underground and be forever beyond all care or concern of the villagers. But the children must not be left to starve. After considering the matter and talking it over with his wife, Farmer Jones said that he would take John and do well by him. Why did he take John? Because John's figure was stout enough to help him in his harvesting. Now that his mother was out of way, and Mrs. Ellis, who had been looking out for a bound girl, concluded that it would be charitable in her to make choice of Kitty, even though she was to too young to be of much use for several years. She took Kitty, and the plan behind her thought was she will be using her as a maid, as a bound girl. But she said, "What? I could do much better, I know," said Mrs. Ellis. "But as no one seems inclined to take her, I must act from a sense of duty, expect to have trouble with the child. And she's an undisciplined thing, used to having her own way." So she said that since no one was interested, she took it. She took her. And that's very kind of her. A sense of duty, expect to have trouble with child, but she's an undisciplined thing. Undisciplined, this word has been used deliberately. The actual word would be indisciplined. But this is used to show that she is lacking the proper education, but she just portrayed herself to be very ostentatious, used to having her own way. But no one said, "I'll take Maggie." Pitying glances were cast on her worn and wasted form. The thoughts were troubled on her account. Mothers brought cast off garments and removing her soiled and ragged clothes, dressed her in clean attire, and sad eyes and patient face of the little one touched many hearts, and even knocked at them for entrance, but none opened to take her in. Who wanted a bedridden child after all, right? "Take her to the poorhouse," said a rough man, of whom the question, "What's to be done with Maggie?" was asked, nobody going to be bothered with her. "The poorhouse is a sad place for sick and helpless child," answered one. "For your child or mine," said the other, lightly speaking. "But for this brat, it will prove a blessed change, right? She will be kept clean, have healthy food, and to be doctored, which is more than can be said of a past condition." So they said it's better to send Maggie there in the poorhouse where she will be she'll be taken care of by the in charges, and she will have a better life. There was reason in that, but still it didn't satisfy. The day following the day of death was made, and the day of burial. A few neighbors were at the miserable hovel. Hovel means a dirty hut. But none followed dead cut, as it bore the unhonored remains. Why unhonored? Because no one pays any sort of respect and reverence to her when she was alive, to its pauper grave. So her dead body was carried, and that was quite an unhonored one. And then It was remains on its pauper grave. Pauper grave means what? Can you know pauper grave? Pauper is actually who has nothing, right? So pauper grave. Farmer Jones, after the coffin was taken out, placed John in his wagon and drove away. So John went, satisfied that he had done his part. Mrs. Ellis spoke to Kate with a hurried air. Bid your sister goodbye. Again, this by spelling is deliberately written wrong. Again, to show highlight the lack of literacy in her, but the way she portrays her, that is causing the audience um, fun or audience hilarious uh, laughter. Okay, now, and drew the tearful children apart ere scarcely their lips had touched in a sobbing farewell. Now the children are taken by different people, even if they did not get time to part their lips after sobbing so much. So they was taken in a hurry, even after exactly after the death of their mother. Hastily, others went out, some glancing at Maggie, and some resolutely refraining from a look. Until all had gone, she was alone. Just beyond the threshold, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, paused and said to the blacksmith's wife, who was hastening off with the rest, it's a cruel thing to have her so. Then take her to the poorhouse. She will have to go there, answered the blacksmith's wife, springing away and leaving Joe behind. Means leaping, she was leaping away and leaving Joe behind. We can understand that she was not at all happy with Thompson's proposal, and she was also telling John Thompson to send Maggie to the poorhouse. For a little while the man stood with a puzzled air. Then he turned back and went into the hovel again. Maggie, with painful effort, had raised herself to an upright position and was sitting on the bed, straining her eyes upon the door out of which all had just departed. A vague terror had come into her thin white face. Oh, Mr. Thompson, she cried out, catching her suspended breath, don't leave me here all alone. Though rough in exterior, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, had a heart, and it was very tender in some places. He liked children and was pleased to have them come to his shop, where sleds means sledge car and wagon were for the village lads without a draft on their hoarded sixpences. So she used to made and mend the wagons or sledges of the village lads, and even without money. With sixpence. Here he answered, bed, and stooping down over, left here alone, almost of a river had brought. Throw her out into the air and across the hovel, and the audience now to the Wilson's house. Joe Thompson was more mad, very harsh on the much from the inside. feel very sad for Maggie to there happened to be childless. Not a woman of saintly temper, means saintly denial for others' good, touching the man his arrival. No manner she will. Mrs. Thompson saw ruffling feathers and he opened the door. A precious burden. Question. She felt it to be so sick. Went out from itself around them both. A love was springing into life. When he was bearing Maggie, there was a love that started springing between the two. Joe felt the child start and shrink against him. He did not reply except by a look that was pleading and cautionary, and said, "Wait a moment for explanation, and please be gentle." And passing in, carried Maggie to small chamber on the first floor and laid her on a bed. Then stepping back, he shut the door and stood face to face with the vinegar tempered wife in his passageway outside. "You have not brought home that sick brat." Anger and astonishment were in her face. Are sometimes her wife's attitude was not at all very much acceptable. Unusually, Joe Thompson got out or kept reading when she fired up on any subject. It was with some surprise, therefore, that she now encountered a firmly set countenance and a resolute pair of eyes. Means we are talking about whom? Maggie here. Now she is going to encounter from firmly set countenance means face, and a resolute pair of eyes means firm eyes. Women's hearts are not half so hard as men's. Joe saw a quick intuition that his resolute bearing had impressed his wife, and he answered quickly and with real indignation. Indignation means anger. "Be that as it may, every woman at the funeral turned her eyes steadily from the sick child's face, and when the cart went off with her dead mother, hurried away, the left her alone in the old hut with the sun not an hour in the sky." "Where were John and Kate?" asked Mrs. Thompson. Where were John and Kate means her siblings. Actually, Joe Thompson tried to explain the full story. Why did he carry Maggie and what was the situation there? And now the wife asked, "Where were John and Kate?" Farmer John tossed John into his wagon and drove off. Katy went home with Mrs. Ellis, but nobody wanted the poor sick one. Send her to the poorhouse was the cry. Everyone was saying that send her to the poorhouse. Why didn't you let her go then? What did you bring her here for? She can't walk to the poorhouse, said Joe. Somebody's arms must carry her, and mine are strong enough for the task. Then why didn't you keep on? Why did you stop here? Demanded the wife. Because I'm not apt to go on fool's errands. Means a talk that was having no hope. I'm not going to follow. The guardians must first be seen and permit obtained. There was no gainsaying this, means there was no contradictingly saying this. When will you see the guardians? Was asked with irrepressible impatience. Irrepressible means stubborn. Tomorrow. Why put it off tomorrow? Go at once for the permit and get the whole thing off of your hands tonight. Means, please send her to the poorhouse and complete the episode. Jane said the wheelwright with an impressiveness of tone that greatly subdued his wife. I read in Bible sometimes and find much said about little children, how the Saviour rebuked and disciples who would not receive them, how he took them up in his arms and blessed them, and how he said that whosoever gave them even a cup of cold water should not go unrewarded. Now, it is a small thing for us to keep this poor motherless child, little one, for a single night, to be kind to her for a single night, to make her life comfortable for a single night. Now, Joe Thompson was trying to convince his wife by referring the Bible's reference here. He's saying that if you help someone, even if with a cold cup of water, then also you'll be blessed. So, for a single night only, let the child get the opportunity to be there. The voice of the strong, rough man shook, and he turned his head away, so that the moisture in his eyes might not be seen. Maybe he was crying. Mrs. Thompson did not answer, but a soft feeling crept into her heart. Look at her kindly, Jen. Speak to her kindly, said Joe. Think of her dead mother and the loneliness, the pain, the sorrow that must be on all her coming life. The softness of his heart gave unwonted eloquence to his lips, means unusual ability to speak well. So his heart was completely buoyed away. He couldn't express the feeling, and the moisture that was there in his eyes he wanted to hide, and such unwanted eloquence to his lips, his sorrow and sad heart has given a vent to. Mrs. Thompson did not reply, but presently turned towards the little chamber where her husband had deposited Maggie, and pushing open the door, went quietly in. Joe did not follow. He saw that her state had changed and felt that it would be best to leave her alone with the child. So he went to his shop, which stood near the house, and walked until dusky evening released him from labor. A light shining through the little chamber windows was the first object that attracts Joe's attention, because Joe was outside in the garage. On turning towards the house, it was a good omen, means it's a good sign. The path led him by the windows, and when opposite, he could not help pausing to look in. It was now dark enough outside, means it was already evening. Maggie lay a little raised on the pillow with the lamp of shining full upon her face. Mrs. Thompson was sitting by the bed, talking to the child, but her back was towards the window, so that her countenance was not seen. So, the way she was sitting and talking to Mrs. Thompson, her face was not seen. For Maggie's face, therefore, Joe must read the character of their intercourse. He saw that her eyes were intently fixed upon his wife, that now and then a few words came, as if in the answers from her lips, that her expressions was sad and tender, but he saw nothing of bitterness or pain. A deep drawn breath was followed by one of relief, as a weight lifted itself from his heart. The way he'd witnessed Maggie and his wife talking to each other, through the expression in both the countenance, Joe Thompson actually understood what was going on, and it seems like a weight has been lifted from his heart itself. On entering, Joe did not go immediately to the little chamber. His heavy tread about the kitchen brought his wife somewhat hurriedly from the room where she had been with Maggie. Joe thought it best not to refer to the child, not to manifest any concern in this regard to her. How soon will supper be ready? He asked. So he actually did not want to, um, you know, showcase this incident that he witnessed so far. He just was talking about the dinner and tried to, making this incident aside. Joe thought it was best not to refer to the child, right? So he said, how soon will the supper be ready? Right soon, answered Mrs. Thompson, beginning to the bustle about. There was no asperity in her voice, means there was no roughness in her voice. After washing from his hands and face the dust and soil of work, Joe left the kitchen and went to the little bedroom. A pair of large bright eyes looked up at him from a snowy bed, looked at him tenderly, gratefully, pleadingly. How his heart swelled in his bosom. With what a quicker motion came the heartbeats. Joe sat down, and now for the first time examining the thin frame carefully under the lamplight, saw that it was an attractive face, and a dull, full of childish sweetness which suffering had not able to obliterate. So the face was so innocent and it was a thin frame, but the innocence could not be surpassed by the suffering of hers. The sweetness was still there. You need, and her soft little hands in his. Yes, sir. Her voice struck a chord that quivered in a low strain of music. Means her voice was bitten a chord that quivered means that glowingly, or that was glowing in a low strain of music. Have you been sick long? Yes, sir. What a sweet patience was there in her tone. Has the doctor been to see you? Not lately? Do any pain? Some you pain? This when you carried me. Yes, now? Asked Jordan. No ache. But it hasn't, said Maggie. Said Satisfaction. Supper is ready, said Mrs. Thompson a little while afterwards. Answered. She has something to eat. On the part of Mrs. Thompson through the window. Fumed. Joe waited after his wife in both their thoughts but for many minutes. Abruptly. What? You understood me. That she was to go to poorhouse, replied Joe, as if surprised at her question. Mrs. Thompson looked rather strangely at her husband for sonic moments and then dropped her eyes. The subject was not again referred to during the meal. At its close, Mrs. Thompson toasted a slice of bread and softened it with milk and butter. Adding to this a cup of tea, she took them to Maggie and held the small waiter, the table, on which she had placed them, while the hungry child ate with every sign of pleasure.